sons of football players, basketball players, so on and so forth.
Yeah,
So-
that's the part. So I think what John does have a point. I just think he worded it in absolutes. And anytime you
By the
word,
way, I've never seen you disagree with John, and you
well,
came in pretty hard.
well,
You
of
came in
course I
pretty
did.
hard.
Of course I did. What he said was completely.
He said genetics doesn't matter for the most part, right?
It's completely full. He said fighters are
Right.
are made, not born. And basically, what he's saying in general, it's the heredity versus environment argument. That's what
Well,
he's
it's both
saying.
is the
And-
reality.
And every study, and believe me, there have been, and this is what I went to school for. And one of the things he said, he goes, "You didn't fight, you wouldn't know." And I'm going, basically, I did go to school for this. This is heredity versus environment. Although you wouldn't have to be a psychologist, you could be a historian, a DNA person, a chemist, a biologist. Any of these people are more qualified than boxers to answer this particular question because it is
Sure.
heredity versus environment. It's not
Right.
a sports question about boxers. It's in general.
Right.
And the
No, I get that. They 100% right.
the studies are very clear on this, even though they disagree completely. So that the range is 30 to 60% is your DNA. And that's based on right now, they can even go to the CRISPR level. It's beyond the double helix for your DNA.
Yeah.
It's into the embedded code within the double helix. They're at that level now. And depending on which study you see, their 30 to 60% will be your DNA. Now, mind you, that does not mean you're going to be a fighter. But what I am
Right.
to say is that if you're going to have that DNA in you, even if
It tilts the scales,
it tilts it. Well, first of all, if you have a father, you're going to want to be like your dad.
right?
some-
All these things tilt the scales, right?
They tilt the scales dramatically because that's your environment. Your father, after you're born, before you're born, it's the heredity. After
Absolutely.
you're born, it's your environment.
There's no way my boys would be fighters if they weren't in that environment. However,
It's their white kids
I-
from Northern Virginia. Zero chance. Yeah.
They might have
however,
purple hair right now, Jimmy. Thankfully, you were a fighter, Jimmy, because your kids would have purple hair right now. Your boys would be
I'm-
out there right now with purple hair and blue streaks and all that bullshit if you weren't a fighter. Thank
I
God.
can honestly say this, and I'm not being humble. I can honestly say I feel as if I have no predisposition to boxing.
I understand why
I-
you say that. I understand why you say that but your dad did get you into the sport, right? So, and then there were certain elements. It's not necessarily that you were a great athlete. As a matter of fact, you weren't a great athlete. What you had was discipline, which again is
I wasn't even a fucking good athlete.
No, you had athleticism combined with a drive to please your father. You did have athleticism,
I did what you did. I did what you did that night when Trump won the election. You called that fucking thing. You did the math, Eric. You looked at all the shit. I figured out ways I could do this without being a prime athlete. And this is one of the few sports that you can do that. You can't do
Correct.
that shit in baseball. You can't bullshit baseball. You can't bullshit those fine-tuned sports where it's
football.
it's
You have
all
to be a real
skill.
athlete. You have to be a real athlete in football. Baseball.
You'll be replaced in a second. There's somebody else waiting behind you. If you're not performing at your best, somebody's behind you in football, basketball, baseball, everything else.
You're
Boxing, you're on your own.
No, you're missing the point he's saying is you can be a regular person, work your fucking ass off, and become a professional fighter. And
True.
Mark
True, true, yeah.
Zuckerberg's a nerd that's now in ripped
Right.
shape. And as an older person, he's in late 30s. He shouldn't even be, but he's ripped. So yeah, it can happen. That's what John meant by you fighters can be made and aren't born. And I agree.
Right.
But even then,
The elite
DNA
level is different.
even then, the DNA that Jimmy has to be a stubborn, tough, a discipline. Those are
Irishman.
DNA characteristics that go back to correct. They're basically Irish characteristics: so hard work, stubborn, tough, discipline. Those go back throughout your DNA forever.
I
So
agree with you 100%.
even though his father wasn't a professional fighter, when John said that, fighters are made, not born, I understand what he's saying, but what he's actually covering is the heredity portion of kids that walk into that gym, maybe because they're fat or they were bullied. and they have that discipline and that fucking want to that burning fire that comes from somewhere. And I would argue even those kids, there's a genetic predisposition for
I
that.
agree with you 100%. I think you have to have something in you already. You know, I mean, obviously
Hey.
the nature nurture debate goes on, but you have to, that combination of genetics and then, you know, you fall into the right circumstances. That's what builds a great fighter.